let's take a closer look today at something a little bit more modern than what we've been looking at, something fairly recent, Chappell Roan's Hot to Go, which we all know means the food's ready for pickup. So I want to show you this sound on a couple different synths. Now, I don't exactly know what synth it was made on, but I do know the synth that is going to give it some of the components that I hear. And I think I'm going to narrow it down to the Prophet-5 and to the Jupiter-8 and to the ARP-2600. And I also made it on Minimoog so that you can hear why I don't think it was on the Minimoog. And I discovered a couple things that are going to be interesting along the way. So let's come on in and we're going to take a closer look and examine the Prophet. And I want to definitely point out before we get started that this sound may have not been made on analog synthesizers. But the main point is it applies to pretty much everything we've ever done on the channel. It doesn't really matter which synth you're using. You can make these sounds on a lot of different synths, including some of the best plugins that are out there now and analog synthesizers. And if you understand the theory of what you're doing, then you'll understand like maybe a synthesizer will be a little bit better to do it. And for different reasons, which we're going to get into today, like sometimes you don't have enough low notes, sometimes you don't have pulse width modulation. That's a clue to where we're going. And you can still do your session and you'll probably come up with something, better because you're going to be using your creativity. And that is what's going to take you really much farther than just worrying about like recreating sounds on the perfect synthesizer every time. So we're going to start with the Prophet-5 and then I'll show you the same thing on the Jupiter and on the ARP-2600, which all were pretty good candidates. So we've got 3 sections on the synthesizer moving from left to right. So starting with the oscillator section right here, oscillator A, that's like oscillator 1. I'm using a sawtooth waveform and I'm going to solo the oscillator so you can hear it. So right away we can see we have a little issue with the Prophet. But I was still able to make the sound. So oscillator 2 took a long time to decay. Now it's gone, so it's clear. So you can hear that oscillator A is an octave above oscillator B. And now I notice there's some chorusing going on. So that is a result of pulse width modulation. So if I bring the modulation wheel down, they're in tune. So again, we have 2 oscillators. Oscillator A is an octave above oscillator B. What are the waveforms? Oscillator A waveform is sawtooth. Oscillator B waveform is square. And by using the square wave, I'm able to modulate it on the Prophet. If I go over to the LFO section, which is over here, I can control the speed of the modulation with this frequency control. And then if I go to the modulation wheel, then I can choose the destination. And I'm choosing the pulse width of, it just says B, but it's oscillator B. So the wheel is going to introduce pulse width modulation to oscillator B. So let's hear that. And it's happening at the rate of this LFO. So that's slow, but you hear it kind of slowly chorusing and lower note. Now I'm going to speed it up a little. So it's kind of detuning the oscillators, but it's not. What it's doing is changing the harmonics and it's giving you a chorusing effect. Without it, it's a very plain sound. It's in octaves, but it doesn't have the attitude. So I'm going to bring the modulation wheel up to taste. Looks like my taste today was 100%. I'm going to back it off just a little bit. So that's probably the place that you want to start, is get the 2 oscillators right and get some pulse width modulation going. And definitely the rate of the pulse width is important, because if I do too much, it sounds like I'm really like the synth is sick. And if I do too slow, There's no attitude. But let's find it just right. I'll bring it up as I play. I like that. So you can play with that and get it where you like it. So it's just a little bit like chorusing and rich, but not sounding like it's sick or out of tune. Okay, so this sound was deceivingly not difficult, but a little bit time consuming because there's details involved in it that made all the difference. And the details involve the touch. You have to sort of play ahead of the beat because notice that there's a slow attack. You don't hear this. Right? It's got kind of a vacuum every time you play a note. Okay, one other thing I want to show you. In the mixer, that controls the level of oscillator A and oscillator B. So in the mixer, we're going to have the first oscillator octave up and the second oscillator is going to be an octave down. And I don't go even on the level. There's less of oscillator B, which is the lower octave with the pulse width. And it helps the sound not be so thick and sort of like, you know, plodding. It just thins it out, but you still get that richness that we were just talking about with the pulse width modulation. So back off the level of the low oscillator, the low octave oscillator, so that there's just a little bit of it, but not equal with the higher octave. Then we go to the filter. This is where all the action is. I'm going to drop the envelope amount, and that is the ADSR modulation to this cutoff frequency, right? So ADSR is the time that it's going to take the filter to move at this amount right here. Okay, so we're going to just hear the filter open to start with. Right? Missing some character. So I'm going to modulate the filter and give it like just an attack in this shape, a kind of a little bit slow attack and a little bit slow decay. So it kind of goes like this, right? Right on the attack of the note. You'll hear it. You hear it going bow, bow, bow. There's nothing. Makes the difference. Then you can figure out your brightness. Let's see how far away I am from the preset. Pretty much on it. And the last thing that's touchy in the filter is the resonance. If you do too much resonance, it gets really thin and squirty. But if you don't have any resonance, it's kind of bassy. So what I do, I use the resonance on these classic analog synthesizers, sometimes just to, almost like a high-pass filter, to back off some of that low frequency. So you hear that? Boom, boom. Taking it off, just a little bit, without it squirting. Okay, and then the very last part of the sound is the volume envelope. And this is the first thing I showed you in terms of the attack. If I have the attack all the way to 0, it has like a little hit on it. So I'm just taking that off. Decay is full. There's sustain. Let's get it to no sustain. Well, I have a ton of decay, so you can see with the sustain down to 0, the sound isn't gonna, you'll probably get away with it, but I have the sustain up to about there. And the decay is important because we don't want it to be too choppy. So the VCA is acting more or less like a gate. It's just like opening up the voltage controlled amplifier to let the filter pass through, but I'm giving it a little bit of slow attack so it doesn't have that chop, that bite on it. More like a vacuum. And then I play a little bit in front of the beat. And that's how I made the sound on the Prophet. So I want to compare that to the same sound on the Jupiter, and then I'm going to compare it to the ARP 2600. Quick interruption. Please remember to like and subscribe to the channel. You really all mean a lot to us. We appreciate where we are today, and it's all because of you. So click those buttons and leave your comments. We read them. They're so thoughtful, and they give us good ideas for making videos in the future. And I also want to point the attention to Think Like a Synth, this course, because I haven't really talked about this part of it so much, but I really geared it towards a non-technical point of view. And one of the things that I had to figure out from an early, time when I was doing sessions was to avoid knob confusion. And I'm calling it that because like when you're just turning the knob and trying to get a sound and then you don't really know what it's going to do and you're just kind of listening and then it doesn't do exactly what you want and you kind of find your way. I couldn't afford that. So I came up with a method. I had some great teachers and I sort of put it all together. And it's the same method that I use right now that I've been using for 40 years on hit records and films. And it helped me be able to make the sound before I heard it. So, because I didn't always have the opportunity, there were other musicians in the room and things were going on. So, I didn't even always have the ability to put headphones on. So I could make the sound, get it close on the panel, at least 80%. And I know you can do it. And then I can dial up the sound once I pull it in. I'm on the big speakers, and then, we can do something fun with the track. So the course is designed for that. Check it out. Let me know what you think. We're offering sales from time to time, so keep an eye on it. It's at anthonymarinellimusic.com. Think Like a Synth. And let's get back to this breakdown. So I want to compare the Prophet to the Jupiter-8. And just before I jump in, I also want to point out how interesting this bass line is, because the bass line is like a major seventh, which is kind of a dissonant interval, and the melody has to kind of work around that, and it gives it like a real personality. And I think that's an important thing to notice. That half step, like Jaws. Right? It's got that in it. So when you listen to the song, like realize sometimes what makes a good sound sometimes are the notes that you're playing. Because that's part of, I think, what makes this, be kind of hooky and catch your ear a little bit. Stand out. It makes it stand out. So I'm going to compare it to the Jupiter-8. So I made the sound on the Jupiter-8 earlier, and I found out something really interesting. Watch this. And then when I go down to the low one, I don't have the B. So the sound probably wasn't made on this Jupiter-8 because the oscillators won't go any lower. Like this oscillator 2 that's playing the low note, it can't get down there. So what happens, for the way I was able to play it, is to play the C and then pitch bend down. I can pitch bend down to the B. So I can play it like this. Can you guys see that? So I have to hit the pitch bend before I play the C, and then I let go of it for the upper notes. So this is what I was saying to you earlier. You'll find that you can't automatically make the sound on any synth, but you have to make some adjustments, right? Prophet, Jupiter. Okay, so the Jupiter needs to be a little brighter. Let me compare them again. That's getting really close. There's maybe a little too much of the filter envelope. So now I'm making the decay time a little bit slower, so it doesn't bite as much. Let's make it a little slower again. Now it's too bright. I'll bring the filter down. So you're seeing in real time what I go through. less filter envelope. There we go. A little brighter. I think we're close. It's a little duller. So you see there's a lot of nuance going on right there. It was very deceptive, and everything matters. Like if I change just the resonance in the filter right here, it's boomy. I just bring up a little resonance and it thins the sound out a lot, but too much and I'm gonna be, which isn't close. Okay, and then the same thing on the Jupiter, getting the envelope shape in this ADSR for the filter, how important that was, because when I had the decay time too low, see, it puts like a bite on it. And this is even more bite. See how slow that is? Rather than, or. So you want to get it just right to match. There's a slight pitch variation there. And then, like I was showing you on the Jupiter, you have to pitch bend down. So you can make it work if you have a Jupiter-8. So far, the Prophet is the best one to do it on, and this may have been made on a plugin, but the objective here is to show you that there's more than one way to do something. So let's have a look at the ARP 2600. It's very compliant, able to match. I've always been able to match almost any synth for some reason. It's like, you know, the neutral synthesizer or something, and I can make things bang when I need to, and I can match more, you know, nuanced types of sounds with it. Maybe just because I can get into the patching a little bit more and control it, but also the character, you know, it kind of has a, this is an early model, so it has a early Moog ladder filter kind of clone, you know, and it's able to get those kind of sounds, and also I can kind of get a flatter sound out of it. So let's just compare the two right away. Okay, I'm going to show you on the Prophet first, and now on the ARP 2600. So notice I held the note too long, so it's different. It's really important to play it the same way too. So I'm going to give you a demo like where I alternate. And we go to the low notes, same thing. So I can kind of clone the Prophet-5 pretty well using the ARP 2600, and all of the same characteristics apply. So we've already gone in depth on them, so I'm not going to necessarily do that on the ARP 2600, but I will show you one thing. The ARP 2600 normally has another LFO down here, and so this is the old keyboard that does not have an LFO. So in order to get the pulse width modulation, and I did not mention the pulse width modulation is a low frequency sine wave, right? We heard that I was slowing it down, but the pulse width modulation is a low frequency sine wave. But on the ARP 2600, if we want to follow this cable all the way up together, I had to pull an LFO, a low frequency sine wave, from this one because I didn't have one down below, but that's not the normal case, right? Nobody's going to have like a whole ARP 2600 just for an LFO, but follow the cable back down. Here we go into the, come up close and take a look at that, pulse width modulation input to voltage controlled oscillator 2. And that's what gives it to us, and you can hear it if I bring it down to nothing. Kind of a normal sound, bringing it up. Too much, out of tune, right? Just enough. Without it, flat. So it gives you the D-tune. I love using pulse width modulation to create chorusing. Works quite well. So let's go to the Minimoog now and see what that's about. I'm going to give you just a quick review. We'll bring it in, and I'm going to show you the settings that we talked about on the first synth, which was the Prophet-5. Oscillator 1, right here, 16 foot, so that's the upper octave, and it's a sawtooth wave. Oscillator 2, it's a 32 foot, so that's an octave below, and that's a square wave. Now, you don't have pulse width modulation on the Minimoog, so we're not able to get that. So the only way to get that sort of chorusy effect is to detune the oscillators, which isn't the same thing, and you're going to hear that in just a second. Remember I said oscillator 2 volume is a little bit down, so you can see that I'm at a 6 here. Oscillator 1 is at 10, so it's a little bit more than half the level. Switches are on. We go to the filter. It's mostly the cutoff frequency doing the work, and then I have a little bit of filter modulation from the ADS envelope generator. And then the VCA, there's a bit of a slow attack time to give it that suction, and then sustain level, and then the decay is the way I told you before, not too short. So let's just hear it. So it's not quite the same. Let's go back to the ARP 2600 and we can hear that. You hear that pulse width modulation compared to the Minimoog. Now it's closing. I could leave it, let it be open more and have a little less ADSR modulation. Let's compare them again. There we go. But the Minimoog is getting that chorusing from oscillator 2 being detuned. So now I have them in tune. Not the same thing over here. So I detune it, but it kind of sounds a little bit sour compared to the other synths. And that's because when you have pulse width modulation, you can keep that center frequency and the harmonics just kind of wrap around. And when they're changing over time, it creates like this sort of detuning effect, but it's like chorusing even though it really isn't chorusing. So the Minimoog really wouldn't be a candidate for me. There's plenty of plugins that you can choose to make this sound because you can get pulse width modulation and you can split the two oscillators into octaves and then make sure that you play it intentionally a little bit ahead of the beat because there's a slow attack time and you get that feel and make it bounce. And you know, kind of a sublime thing. There's a lot of interest going on. You think it's a simple tune and it's just like, just make the sound. But if you really dig into it and try to make this sound, and you'll see this sound in particular, every little setting makes a huge difference. So I hope you like this one. I really enjoyed diving into it. You know, a modern tune and recreating it on these analog synthesizers, vintage analog synthesizers. Do it on your plugins and let me know what you come up with. So let's go out on some music, and just for fun, I'm going to jump around between the Prophet-5, the Jupiter-8, and the ARP 2600 so that you can get a sense of the differences and some, you know, little bit crazy things I have to do to make it work. Let's count it off.